Hello, Thunder Wizards. So I'm coming to you much later than normal. I am getting ready for my move to Australia, and so my time's all weird, and I'm busy, crazy busy getting everything ready. In any case, I want to share some thoughts with you about something I talk about a lot, which was inspired by a discussion that I had with a good friend of mine, and he may end up watching this. So if he is, he'll know who he is and what our discussion was. But it's a very common uh, it's a very common theme for me, which is it's extremely important if you want to be able to understand religion and spirituality and be able to have the power of choice over what you want to believe and what you want to practice. It's extremely important that you understand more than anything else critical thinking. Specifically, you must be able to fearlessly identify your own emotional agendas. And I have to tell you, most people cannot do this. And that includes religious and non religious people. So called people of science who love to talk about critical thinking all the time and throw around the word critical thinking, in my experience, are often just as hampered in their critical thinking than others. They may have some things working for them, such as they actually believe in science and they believe in data that you can point to, and there are some things that are real and some things that aren't. And knowing the difference between your own, wanting your own, projecting your own fantasy in the world. They understand these concepts, but they have a hard time identifying it in themselves. And so we can easily identify it with religious people, but with so called critical thinkers, agnostics, atheists, oftentimes they are completely unaware of their lack of critical thinking. And specifically, let me talk about what I mean when I'm talking about critical thinking. When I'm talking about critical thinking, I'm not talking about being able to tell the difference between the sun is up in the sky or the sun is down. When we're talking about science, and people want to, and listen, I'm a firm believer in science. Absolutely 100% objective reality is extremely important. And without it, we don't function very well. So I'm a firm believer in that. But I forgot what I was saying. So people who want to view themselves as critical thinkers and who rely on objective science and objective data, that tends to sometimes give them a false sense of security that they themselves don't have any emotional agendas or assumptions when it comes to spirituality. And so, what I'm here to make the argument is, and I invite you, if you are somebody that's in that category, and if so, I respect and appreciate that. I want you to be willing to take a look at the emotional agendas that drive your thinking and that drive your beliefs, and more importantly, that frame your beliefs. Because I've said this before and I'll say it again. In my experience, a lot of agnostics and atheists are unconscious monotheists. I incorrectly called them closet monotheists, which is not accurate because a closet monotheist says that they're in secret a monotheist, but they pretend not to be out in the world. No, they're not closet monotheists, they're unconscious monotheists. That doesn't mean that they choose to believe in a deity, like an all powerful deity. It means that the assumptions that go with Abrahamic monotheism frame their worldview. And when it comes to science, they're very multifaceted and able to think on multiple planes. But when it comes to spirituality, Once you start talking about spirituality and things that are non-physical and things that cannot be quantified in scientific data, then all of a sudden they get thrust unconsciously. They don't realize it, but they are unconsciously thrust into the framework of Abrahamic literalism. And so everything is framed within that. And so here's what I think happens. I think what happens is, because we live in the society that we live in, and let me back up a little further again. The society that we live in, Western society, what we see as Western society, which has and continues to take over the thinking all over the world. I mean, even somebody made a really great argument that communism, Chinese communism, is a direct result of their adoption and reaction and literal expression of Western materialism, specifically Abrahamic religion. Abrahamic religion creates materialism. I won't get into it. But belief in money and belief in stuff and belief in owning things and conquering people and doing that, the way that capitalists do that comes directly from Abrahamic religions. And I don't have time to get into that right now. But somebody made the really great observation. It was a Chinese woman. She made, and she explained it very well. She went through how it was that Abrahamic Christianity actually set the stage for Chinese communism, and her argument was that it was the inevitable and natural progression of the adoption of the assumptions inherent in it. Those are my words, but in other words, they believed very strongly in the ancestors. And the first thing that Western Christian missionaries brought with them, by the way, Western businessmen were coming into China and helping them modernize their business, and because China wanted to be part of the rest of the world. And so American and English and European businessmen were coming over, and the elites in China were changing the way that they looked at the world and world commerce. And along with that came Christianity. And Christianity started attacking the belief in the ancestors. And she made this really great argument that the destruction of the belief in the ancestors set the stage for the literalism that came through, which resulted in communism. And that was the inevitable result of that. For those people's mindset went directly into that. And so I'm saying that in the West, this happened to us, 2,000 years ago, when the Roman Empire started conquering all of Europe and all of the known world, and then perfected their empire mentality with Abrahamic monotheism, because it was just perfect for that. And there's a video, if you watch it, the attack of the monotheists, where I explain to you how and why Abrahamic monotheism came into existence, and that the whole reason for it was to create a nationalist state. And it was, in their minds, they were trying to protect their way of life. But the nationalism, by the way, we're doing it right now, whether you call it white nationalism or whatever kind of nationalism it is, it's the same kind of thing. It's coming from the same mindset. In any case, again, I've got so many things in my head, it's hard for me to put it into words. So, what I want to talk about here is, as I was talking with my friend who identifies as an agnostic, but I got to tell you, my experience of him is he desperately wants spirituality. He wants to believe in it, but he can't seem to get himself to go there, so he falls back on what feels safe to him, which is agnosticism. He's a very smart guy, very intellectual guy, but in my experience, I don't think he sees how his thinking has been framed by Abrahamic monotheism. So first we have to take a look at it. What is the difference? So I showed you the picture here, which you see Moses on the left, and he's got his arms outstretched, expressing the prophet who is, bringing fire and brimstone and expressing the truth of the external God and forcing it onto us, we humans. And then the guy on the right there is an East Indian yogi of what sect I don't know, but he is having an internal experience of the divine. And so the external divinity expression comes from using intellectualized concepts and implementing those concepts and forcing those concepts into the mindset of others. The whole point is to conquer you with their belief system so that you will fall in line and that you will stop believing and experiencing your own experience of the divinity. Your own experience of the divinity is not acceptable. And now you can see why the Chinese turned to communism, because what does communism say? That the individual is destructive, and we want to become this mass of selfless cogs in a giant wheel. This comes from the influence of the empirical mindset of Abrahamic monotheism. Whereas the guy on the right, he is seeking an internal experience. He wants to personally experience the divine, and his personal experience of the divine is what takes over and becomes more important than anything else. And for him, you may have your own experience and he has his experience. And his internal experience is more important than your external philosophical understanding. So, of course, they each have their own inherent flaws, which is if you get too wrapped up in your own narcissism, then that has its own problems. But there's some assumptions in there as well, what I won't get into. Bottom line is this. Here's the point I'm trying to make. I believe that my friend is an unconscious monotheist, not because he wants to believe in a one God controlling everything, but that he has been programmed to see the universe that way. And whenever you start talking about anything spiritual, he automatically goes into a mindset where spirituality is out there, like God. God is out there, and we are subject to God. And so he obviously is going to rebel against that for obvious reasons, because Abrahamic monotheism is incredibly oppressive and destructive in all kinds of different ways. But he made the argument that, and he wanted to get into, we didn't have time to talk, but he wanted to get into the argument of the question of evil, and that he wanted to go into an intellectual argument, which he probably heard from some atheist somewhere, that if there is evil in the world, there cannot be a God. And I said to him, you have a lot of assumptions in that. And your assumptions are that you're projecting onto the universe that either there is this one God who is overseeing everything and imposing his will, and he is out there and you are down here. And therefore, if there is this all-powerful, all-loving God and there is evil, they can't exist. And I said, you see, you are totally being fed that assumption from Abrahamic monotheism. And I said, if you're able to get rid of that assumption, then you can look at things, your value judgments will be different. And we started to get into it, and we didn't have time, but I could really tell it was going to be a tough conversation. And the hardest part would be to help him see his assumption and how he is being controlled by his assumption. And here's how he's being controlled by his assumption. This is where critical thinking comes in. So let me talk again about critical thinking. Critical thinking is not just being able to look at the facts and say, yeah, the sun is up in the sky and yes, science is real and all of that. That's not what I mean by critical thinking. What I mean by critical thinking is being able to know when you are being influenced by your own unconscious emotional agendas. You know that you're being controlled by your unconscious emotional agendas when you have a really intense emotional attachment to your argument. And he did. So much so that I couldn't get a word in edgewise. And so that's what let me say he's got an unconscious emotional attachment. His now I'm taking his inventory, and I can't do that, but I'm trying to figure out where he's coming from. But if I were in his shoes and I was reacting that way, I think here's what would be going on with me. I think what was going on is that he has a strong and understandable emotional revulsion to the idea of Jehovah, all powerful, judgmental, controlling Jehovah, controlling the universe. He emotionally doesn't like that because since he is part of the Western society, he has been trained on an unconscious level to believe that's true. And so when we feel threatened, we become emotionally volatile. And so he has a very strong reaction. But what he doesn't see is that his reaction is actually coming from the same understanding. And if you are able to release that, then you can start looking at other things, without an emotional attachment one way or another. Is that good? Is that wrong? He kept on wanting to talk about evil. And I said, this whole idea of evil has all kinds of assumptions in it. Well, what about the poor little kid who grows up in the blah, blah, blah? I hear this all the time. Whenever I talk about karma, there's inevitably somebody who wants to talk to me and sorry, I got distracted because I see. By the way, if you're on the channel and this is your first time on the channel, this is a question and answer. I will eventually get to asking if there are any questions out there. I don't want any comments. You don't have to share your comments. I don't want you to agree or disagree. The reason for that is because I'm going to look for the questions. And if you have a question, you write the word question and then put your question next to it. I don't want to have to spend time scrolling through your big paragraphs of your thoughts. And I'm sure you have a lot of deep and powerful thoughts, but this is a question and answer. So that's what I like to keep it focused on. So please refrain from any comments unless you have a question for me. All right. So what I'm trying to say is that I believe that my friend had a very strong emotional reaction because on an unconscious level, he still believes that there is this God out there and he's fighting against it. So, as strange as this is going to sound, in a very broad way, I put Satanists and what is that word? What did I say? Atheists and Satanists in the same bracket. Not because they believe the same thing, not at all, but because they are both operating from the same unconscious assumption that they are rebelling against. So, if you have been stamped, and if you live in our society, whether you know it or not, you have been stamped with this belief. You may not have grown up in a religious home. You may have never gone to church or mosque or temple. It doesn't matter. You have been programmed to believe that there is this one all-powerful being out there who controls everything. And you are either bowing down and allowing that belief to take over, or you are fighting against it. In either case, you assume that it's true. And if you're fighting against it, it's because you feel attacked by that belief. And so you are vehemently fighting against it. Satanism is the perfect example because if without Jehovah, there is no need for Satan. Satan cannot exist without the belief in Jehovah because Satan is the antithesis of God. And so you have God and anti-God. And so it's a without Satan, it's also harder to believe And this is one of the selling points of Christianity, that Christianity wants to sell to you that you have to believe in Jesus because there's this devil out there. I know this because I went to Bible college. I was going to be a minister when I was a young man, and I read the Bible in Greek and Latin and blah, blah, blah. And I have some friends. I'm not in contact with this guy anymore, but there was one guy that I went to Bible school with, Bible college, university, whatever. And he is out there making movies. And if I told you the movies that he's made, you'd know, well, you may not know his name, but you would know the movies. And I'm not going to spill that. But he is a devout, born again Christian. And in all of his movies, I know it because I remember, being trained to do this and to bring the gospel to the world. He doesn't make movies about come believe in Jesus, but in all of his movies, there is the mythology about it. And I can look at it and see, yeah, he goes home feeling good. Yeah, he made a blockbuster movie, but he's still giving this message of believe in Jesus because if you don't, the devil will come and kill you. And that's one of the selling points. And the fear takes you out of your ability to think objectively and to think critically, because then you are overwhelmed with this fear, and the fear drives you to accept Jesus. In fact, one of the main arguments that Christians give when they're trying to proselytize is they say, well, if you're right and I'm wrong, we're all good. But if I'm right and you're wrong, then you're going to go to hell. So don't you think you're better off believing me because it's just safer? It's one of the things they do. They use fear to get you out of your ability to think objectively and to think critically and to operate from your emotions. Now, if you're somebody like me, you may want to rebel against that because I don't like the idea of being controlled. But in reality, being a staunch atheist who really is an unconscious monotheist who's fighting against their own monotheist programming is really just the flip side of the coin of the Christian who bows down and wants to serve God because God has all the power and I have the fear of God in me and all that kind of stuff. So if we really want to be critical thinkers, we have to be able to acknowledge what our emotional reactions are. If the idea of Jehovah, the one God that controls everything and is judging everybody, if that causes you strong emotional reactions one way or another, then it's going to be challenging for you to analyze what you believe. So when you start dealing with Eastern religions, which, let me once again make a distinction between Western monotheism and Eastern, whether it's polytheism or, whatever. There's all different kinds of isms, but all of the Eastern religions focus on internal experience. Whether you're polytheists are the same. It's about an internal experience. And the Western religion, monotheism, is all about an external imposition. God doing something to you or the devil doing something to you. You are small and God is big. God is out there, you are down here. Whereas in the Eastern religions, whether they are polytheists or whether they're Buddhists or whether they're Taoists, they still have this experience that this is an internal experience of divinity. And even if you talk to a polytheist, they will say the gods are the expressions of us, that we are God, and the gods are all rays of our own projection into the universe. So they have a completely different viewpoint on all of it, which is why they're not literalist in their beliefs. Why if you ask many people in the Hindu religion about Ganesha is literal and is symbolic. He is real, he is not. He is the one God is many, you are God, all that kind of stuff. They can talk like that in ways that Westerners get very confused because they can't pinpoint you literally. Either there's many or there's one. Is it internal or external? Is it all our projection, or are we affected by them? You want to pick a side. And that is because the monotheist religions were created to be tools of empirical control. And the way to control a society is to make things literal. So this is where science falls short. Science, and again, I am a firm believer in science. My dad was a physicist. He was an astrophysicist, and so I know and appreciate science. I believe in things like global warming and all kinds of stuff because the scientific data tells us, as well as my own experience. So I'm a firm believer in that. But where science falls short is whenever it comes to anything that can't be quantified. And so atheists tend to be in that, stuck in that category. And again, I'm doing a really bad job of trying to say that the mindset is coming from the need to know, which is, again, a Abrahamic religious concept. The need to know and to be able to make a determination one way or the other. Why? Because it keeps us safe. So what I'm saying is that there's an unconscious need in many agnostics and atheists to deny any spirituality because they can't quantify it in dualistic, literal ways. That came from monotheism. How do I know that? Because the Abrahamic texts, the Genesis and all that, the Old Testament and the New Testament, were written to be interpreted for the first time in human history. Spiritual writings were written to be interpreted as literal historical documents when they weren't. And that is one of the big reasons why, number one, I reject all Abrahamic spirituality, because it was designed to be a literalist document. And people who try to take Abrahamic religion and Abrahamic scriptures and look at them symbolically are always going to run into an unconscious conflict about it. And they're either going to pick and choose what they like, or they will end up succumbing and becoming fundamentalists, because it is a fundamentalist belief system, and it is a fundamentalist body of writings. So, anyway, point is, I want to ask all of you to meditate on your emotional reactions to the idea of any spiritual concept that you have. By the way, this is why modern neo-heathens who mostly identify as Asatru and folkish Asatru and all of that, the majority of them tend to be literalists. They tend to believe that Odin is a man with a beard and missing an eye, with an eye patch, somewhere sitting on a throne somewhere. They need to believe them as real beings. They want to believe that they were real humans that walked the earth. So, does it sound familiar? Moses really walked the earth. Moses did part the Red Sea. Jesus did die on the cross. Jesus never existed. Moses never existed. They're fictitious characters presented as historical fact when they're not. So what I'm saying is that this is so ingrained. This is so ingrained in our mindset that even when people are trying to think outside of the box, they can't. And then they run into these kinds of false arguments of the argument against evil. If there is evil, there cannot be a God, or there cannot be any gods. And so in order to really understand, for me, it took me I don't know how many years. When I left Christianity, I was, how old was I? 21. So it took me probably 7 or 8 years of being immersed in Taoist spirituality before I was able to begin to understand thinking holographically and to think um, in terms of things it isn't an either or, it's a this and that and neither all at the same time. And this is traditional spirituality. In any case, I'll check and see if we have any questions. Again, I really want you guys to not throw your opinion out there. I just would like to answer questions. So let me see. All right. So, yeah, bunch of opinions, bunch of statements. None. Here's one question. Lorena Grecu, question: is monotheism constructive in any way? No, not in my opinion. Not Abrahamic monotheism. Monotheism isn't the same as pantheism or panentheism, and I'm really not going to get into that because the truth is that's still an over intellectualized concept that was created by people who are Abrahamically influenced in their thinking anyway. But do I think it's constructive? Abrahamic? No, I don't think there's anything constructive about it. It limits you because the whole idea of monotheism is that God is out there and you are down here, that you are little and God is big, and you have to wait around for God's will, and you have to wait around for doing what you're supposed to do rather than what you want to do, that you don't have any influence on your reality, that, all that stuff. I mean, I just don't see anything life affirming or empowering about that in any way, which is one of the reasons why modern people are so lazy, is because they expect God to do it for them and they're waiting around for God to give them commandments. And people do this. If I could just get a sign, if I could just get a sign to know what I'm supposed to do. And you have a sign. It's whatever you want to do. Go do that. That's your sign. But our ancestors, our pre-Abrahamic, pre-Christian ancestors, believed that life should be conquered, that your duty as a human being was to go and conquer your life, and that life wasn't necessarily going to be easy, but that you would be empowered by the gods, by nature, that if you followed your truth, which again is completely the antithesis of monotheism, which says that you can't have, that's pride. That's the sin of pride. That's the original sin. Remember what the original sin was? The original sin was that Adam and Eve, these completely innocent, childlike beings who live in perfection, have everything, for some strange, cruel reason, Jehovah decides to put this magical fruit, which if they eat it, they will become like God. And but they're not allowed. And he goes around and says, you can do anything you want, but you can't eat that. Don't eat that fruit. And of course, then that's the only thing they're going to think about is that one fruit. What the heck is that fruit about? I mean, I assume the fruit is here because this is our garden and you want to feed us. Why are you giving us food we can't eat? It reminds me of the cartoon series Futurama. And the professor gives them this box and says, whatever you do, do not open this box. And one of the characters, I think it's Fry, says, I don't know what's in that box, but whatever it is, it's the only thing I've ever wanted. And so, Jehovah from the beginning is just a masochistic asshole. A sadistic asshole. Why would you want to worship a God that does that? But why would you want to worship a God that is pissed off at you because you have knowledge? None of that makes any sense. So we can just stop right there at the very beginning. It's the foundational understanding of Jehovah and his relationship to his creation. The whole idea that you are the creation of Jehovah. And then again, why would you want to worship a deity who's so imperfect and so narcissistic that even though he created you, you're imperfect, and your imperfection pisses him off so much that the only thing he can do is put you in eternal torment. Now, for anybody who wants to sit there and talk to me about, yes, but you don't understand, it's God is a God of love and all that. You can talk about love as much as you want after that. It's like putting cream cheese on a piece of shit. It doesn't change anything. The cream cheese doesn't make it any taste any better, or it doesn't do anything for you. So that's what happens when you start with this masochistic, um, insecure control freak who hates his own children that he created because they're imperfect. Doesn't make any sense. If he's that into perfection, he would create what he believes to be perfection. And the point is that this is all of our projection. So what I do say to people is I am a polytheist, and I believe in all kinds of gods. There are some gods that I don't worship and some that I do. Jehovah is not one that I will ever worship again, because I do believe that Jehovah exists. I also believe that the gods are our own projection. Whatever God we're talking about, they are projections of ourselves that actually exist and have power, and they come from us. We project them because we are the source of all of it. Jehovah is a projection of the human narcissistic ego. And so if you worship Jehovah, you're worshiping your own narcissism. So, I'm not going to say Jehovah doesn't exist, because human narcissism exists. Okay, so let's see if there's any more questions here. Plastic surgery Beth. I really want to know why you called yourself that. Where did we go? Plastic surgery Beth. Message retracted. All right. Timothy Zoll, question. What is the best way to evolve away from all or nothing Abrahamic indoctrination? It's a good question. I do believe that experience changes that. For me, I can't speak for everybody, and everybody is different and built differently. But for me, I need to have experience. And what I was starting to tell my agnostic friend was that when he was asking me some kind of question, which I think unconsciously he was asking, how do I think differently? But what I was saying is that there's no way for you to know what I'm talking about if you haven't experienced it. And so the way to experience it, this is why Eastern religions focus so heavily on meditation or yoga or qigong or mantra, some kind of experience. And for me, I need to have an experience with life force energy. That's why I do qigong. And if you do real qigong, go up here to neo.thunderwizard.com or courses.thunderwizard.com and click on the Celestial Qigong. That's why I teach it. If you find a practice that is like the real thing, then you will have an experience. Now, you may come to a conclusion about what that experience is. My experience is that it's connecting to non physical life force energy. And then at that point, what I think my friend has difficulty with is the difficulty that comes with choosing to believe. I don't think he would be able to make the distinction between choosing to just accept that there is a force we don't understand called chi or prana or whatever it is, and that we can have this personal experience with it. I don't think he can differentiate that with the Christian belief of just pray to Jesus and you'll see Jesus will come into your heart. Because he'll go, even if I have an experience, how do I know that that isn't all in my head? That's the problem with him. That's why he wants proof. You can't. There's just some things that don't fall into that category. How can you prove it? I get this all the time. People ask me when I talk about karma and I talk about my beliefs and what I teach, which is that, the first thing you need to do is drop all fear-based belief systems, which include things like atheism and agnosticism. Drop all fear-based belief systems and listen to what gives you the greatest joy, and choose to believe that that greatest joy, if there is such a thing as God, that's what it is. And that your job is to follow that joy and to live it no matter what comes in front of you. And then you fearlessly go after it. And then you will have to trust that the universe will empower you and take care of you. You will have to trust the universe. I think what he has difficulty in is letting go and trusting in that way, because he can't make the difference between that kind of trust in the universe and belief in Jesus. He can't make the distinction in his mind. But so I'm saying, have an experience. The best thing I can recommend, and I don't know if there are other ways, other people are different. I say go do some qigong. Get connected to energy and feel the energy. Feel it. And then create a connection with it and see where it takes you. Like in the picture, the guy, he's closing one nostril and inhaling and whatever. He's having an internal experience, and he's using life force energy, his breath in that picture, to have that experience of the external environment and the internal all within himself. So that's what I recommend. It takes time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. Again, Westerners want everything right away. It takes time. Sorry, I went to the gym. I'm sore. That's why I'm playing with my pec, because it's sore. Sorry, I'm not trying to feel myself up on camera. Okay, so let's see. Richard Bullard. What was the evidence that convinced you Abraham, Moses, and Jesus were myth in your spiritual journey? Okay, Richard, so you're fairly new to the channel, right? I have a book. Go up to courses.thunderwizard.com. You can click on my books. I have a book called Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward. And in that, I share my personal experience with Odin, but then I go into an objective analysis of the historical data. And I give my interpretation on that. So there is external data. So in terms of what convinced me that Abraham, Moses, and Jesus were myth, it's very easy to prove that. Very easy to prove that. My personal experience started before that. As I say, as I've said many times, I didn't leave Christianity because I stopped believing in it. I believed in it. I stopped following Christianity because I could not ethically follow that narcissistic, sadistic asshole. I couldn't do it anymore. I had non-Christian friends, some of them atheists, agnostics, whatever they weren't Christian, and they were just normal. And they were far more dependable. They were far more loving. They would have walked in front of a bus to save my life. Whereas all the Christian people I knew, for the most part, were extremely judgmental and frightened and petty, and you couldn't trust them as far as you could throw them. They were duplicitous and hypocritical. And my thought process was, how can this God be real when the majority of the Christians I know are so fucked up and the non-Christians seem so put together, and even though they don't believe in any of it, they're living these so-called spiritual principles, and those who believe in it can't follow it to save their life. I mean, they can follow the letter of some things, going to church and not drinking and not smoking and all that, but when it comes to loving your neighbor as yourself and not judging other people, they can't do it. So that was evidence to me just that something was off. But in terms of the other stuff, if you're wanting to know how you can prove, it's very easily provable. And go read that book. And you can go on my channel because I talk about it on my channel as well. But I don't have time to go into all of it. Now, watch the latest one called The Attack of the Monotheists. That's the most recent one I just did very recently, and I go through some of the historical events that prove. I'll give you one. Let's talk about Jesus. I didn't talk about Jesus in that one. So I can prove to you right here and now that Jesus never existed. And that is because Jesus in the New Testament is called Jesus of Nazareth. And it is said that he was raised in the village of Nazareth. Now, he wasn't born there, he was supposedly born in Bethlehem. But he was raised in the city of Nazareth. Now, the city of Nazareth was founded some 200 years or 100, somewhere, 100 to 200 years after the supposed death of Jesus. And we know this, and we can confirm this, even though the Christians come up with these nonsensical, whatever. But we can confirm this absolutely in history that Nazareth could not have existed during the time that Jesus was supposed to be alive. So it is impossible for there to have been a Jesus of Nazareth, because Nazareth didn't exist. And it is also a fact that the Gospels, as we know them, were written down. And this is, not up for negotiation. Even the Christians accept that the Gospels were written some 100 to 200 years after Jesus' death. So, Occam's razor says if Nazareth was founded 100 to 200 years after Jesus' supposed death, and the Gospels were written at that same time, it means that they were using an existing city as a source material for this mythological creature known as Jesus. That's just one thing. And again, you're not going to hear this. The other thing is, we still have documentaries that are supposedly non-spiritual, where people want to talk about, the Jesus figure and who he probably was, or Moses, or the Jews being taken captive in not Jews, but the Hebrews being taken captive in Egypt. None of that happened. We know that historically. It's proven. But it's still so ingrained in our culture that even so-called historical channels will talk about it as though it's some kind of historical fact. It's not. So if you really want to find out the historicity of it, do a tiny bit of research on your own and you'll be able to find out. The rest of it is just common sense. Plastic surgery Beth. Question. So Jehovah is a real God, or humans created him to push a belief system? So you're being influenced by Abrahamic monotheism just by asking that question, because it's not an either or. But I want to tap into the underlying assumption of what you're saying, because it comes from a fear-based belief. So this is what happens. If we are being oppressed, one of the ways we defend ourselves is we demonize our oppressors. And this is what we do when we break up with somebody. Like if we're in a relationship and the relationship starts falling apart, we start finding everything wrong with them so that we can break up with them. It's a human way of protection, because it distances you, so it gives us the ability to reject them. So saying things like Jehovah was created to push a belief system on us, even though a lot of things that I've said, that is definitely something I do believe happened. It's not an either or. Jehovah is a real God in the same sense that your narcissism is real. Does that mean that you should spend your life investing and empowering your own narcissism? No. Is Jehovah something that has been used and morphed and abused and created to consciously and unconsciously oppress others? Yes. So it's not an either or. It's a this and a that. Okay? So don't think in the dualist Abrahamic mindset. Let it be a bunch of different things all at the same time. The other thing about Jesus is that even though Jesus of Nazareth didn't exist, there probably was at least one person long before the supposed Jesus character lived. Yeshu Hanotsari, which is misunderstood as Nazareth, but it means the esoteric savior. Yeshua Hanotsari. It means the mystical savior. And there have been scholars, Hebrew or would have been Jewish scholars, who became mystics and then became Yeshua Hanotsri, which would have been a title that was given to people. So this is now becomes a mythological title, like sort of like Merlin the magician. There never was a Merlin the magician. He's a mythological creation. Or King Arthur. Never was a King Arthur. Sorry, he's a mythological creation. Or Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu means old man, meaning a wise old man. And there are multiple people who wrote under the pen name of Lao Tzu. There never was one Lao Tzu. So Yeshua Hanotsri would have been a title of the mystical sect of the Jews, which later turned into proto-Gnosticism. So Gnosticism was a Jewish sect that then was further evolved into Christianity, which then further evolved into what we now know as Christianity. And I have a whole video on that as well. Go watch that one. How I say something in the title about how the Christian religion how it became a cult of fear and whatever, something like that. Go look for it. I don't remember all the titles. Nikhil Rawal, question. Is there a need to raise vibrations to connect with other dimensions and or entities to gain specific knowledge? How and where can an uninitiated make a start? So you ask the question, is there a need to raise vibrations? And then you ask me how to do it. So that tells me that you're following my request, which is to only ask a question, but you're kind of giving a statement in there, which is, I can tell that's probably what you believe. Do you need to connect with other dimensions and entities? The short answer is no, you don't. The second question is, that doesn't mean that you can't. You just said, do you need to? And no, you don't. This is again, there's multiple ways to get to the same way. People who are polytheists worship deities. And these deities are portals to change your vibration and all of that and gain internal experience and knowledge. And then there are people who just go to have an experience of the self, which is like what Buddhism and Taoism. Even though the truth is that Taoism, as we understand it, is philosophical Taoism. Like Lao Tzu is philosophical Taoism. The truth is that the Taoists were hardcore polytheists. Hardcore. With all kinds of rituals and rules and all that kind of stuff. People don't know that because, again, people in the West, the stuff that comes from the East and ends up in the West has usually been filtered and watered down, and you get a bunch of watered down, generalized cotton candy for the most part. So how and where to start? You go to thunderwizard.com and you sign up. You can sign up at the bottom level, and that will take you all the way through. I teach shamanism from A to Z. Listen, these links up here are here for a reason, guys. So if you're just coming onto my channel and just listening to me babble because you have nothing better to do, you're welcome to do that. But if you really want to learn what I'm teaching, you've got to put it into action. You've got to do the exercises. So that is why I created the thunderwizard.com website. And there's two levels. There's the Manifestation Mastery course, and then there's just the Master Shamanism course, which itself is worth a hell of a lot of money. If I were to teach that and put it into a package, I would charge a hell of a lot of money for that. So if you're serious and you're asking me how can you start to connect and raise your vibrational level, you can prove to me that you are serious about that question by going there and signing up. Okay? That's why I created all that stuff. All right. So I don't see any more questions here. How many people are on here? 22. I'm going to take a short break. My voice is starting to bother me. And we're going to learn about Qigong, which is, if you want to have, this is another way. You asked my question, how does the uninitiated start? This is another way to do that. Hi, I'm Michael Denny of SpiritTao.com, and this is Celestial Negung Part 1. Celestial Negung means that this is power that is descending from heaven. And the idea is that we are all microcosms of the entire universe. You are the entire universe, and everything around you is simply the projection. You are looking within yourself. So when you look up into the stars at night, you're actually looking deep within your own body. When you look at the sun, the moon, the trees, the flowers, you're looking within yourself. This is Negung. And so what we're doing is we're simply releasing that infinity from within us. You are tapping into and releasing the power that is within our own body, our own cells, our own organs. So one of the reasons that I'm making this DVD is in the hope that the essence and the spirit of the teaching of the Shang-Qing arts can be taught to the world at large, and it is my hope that the core essence of what the Shang-Qing tradition is will continue to live and grow and evolve. As we move on into the Aquarian age, everything is changing. I don't need to tell you that. The entire world is changing, and what we are seeing now is that if people hold on to external things, they are very challenged in life. And those who are making the transition into the next phase that we are moving into in the world as we approach 2012, those who look within and find their source of strength from within, those are the people who are getting the most out of life and will make the transition into the next phase of evolution most comfortably. It is my belief that the Shang-Qing tradition is one method whereby human beings can evolve into the next level of being in the most comfortable fashion and be able to take advantage of the rapid, energetic, mental, and spiritual changes that are going on in the world today. See that? It's coming. June 2000, what did I say, 2009? Those videos are 10 years old. Still my most powerful practice. So that's why I keep putting it out there. You know, if it works, don't fix it. All right, let's take a look and see if there are any questions here. Nikhil Rawal, question. No, I already asked that. Lucifer Apollo. Hi, Lucifer Apollo, please ask a question. Otherwise, this is a question and answer. So thanks for having opinion, but I prefer a question. Chris Arcianega, question. When someone does your shamanism course, does that make them go under your same lineage? I don't know why you're asking that question. Are you asking that question because that's what you want? Are you asking that question because it bothers you? Of course. So I guess I can answer that question this way. I'm technically what's called a Sijo. A Sifu is a teacher. A what do they call it? There's another word I'm forgetting. Sigong means a grand master, and then there's a Sijo. A Sijo means that this is somebody who has started their own lineage. Doesn't necessarily mean that they, I mean, I did it because I had to, because I got kicked out of the sect. So you ask them, they're not going to say, "Oh yes, we co-sign him," because I ended up getting kicked out of the sect for all kinds of reasons. But so you're going under my lineage, under my power, which means, of course, whatever beings are working through me. But I don't know why you're asking that, because if it's important to you, then great. Yeah, you can hold on to it. If it's something that bothers you, don't worry about it. I obviously don't. I don't have an ego about that. So I don't know if I answered your question or not. And the deities being engaged, are they jealous entities? Where are these questions coming from?